Yeah, I think stuff to do with family overwhelms me quite a bit. You know, worry or stress around family side of things, that does overwhelm me quite a bit. But in terms of, you know, doing the job and things like that, I don't feel too overwhelmed by that.
The invitation arrived by hand. No email, no phone call, no intermediary. A palace footman in full royal livery appeared at each door, waited in complete silence for the envelope to be received, and withdrew without a single word exchanged. The card inside was elegant, understated, and precisely worded, hinting at a restructuring of royal privileges ahead of an imminent throne transition. Dinner in the West Dining Room, black tie, 7 o'clock. Tom, Laura, Camilla. They each read those words and felt the same electric current shoot straight through them. They accepted within the hour. And that decision, that moment of greedy, unconcealed eagerness, would cost them everything. The dinner. The West Dining Room had never felt so suffocating. Tall ivory candles burned in their silver holders along the length of the long oak table, throwing warm light across the crystal glasses, the polished cutlery, and the carefully arranged place settings. Under any other circumstances, this room would have radiated the dignified grandeur it was designed to project. Tonight, it pulsed with something else entirely. Something coiled. Something waiting. Tom sat rigidly in his chair, his jaw tight, his eyes making repeated, barely concealed trips toward the heavy wooden doors leading down to the antique storage vault. His silver fork stabbed mechanically at the beef on his plate, not from hunger, but from the nervous energy of a man who could smell victory and couldn't quite hold himself still. He had spent years positioning himself for a moment exactly like this one. Years of carefully cultivated access, strategic relationships, and quiet maneuvering behind the scenes of a palace that had never truly accepted him. Tonight, he told himself, that patience would finally pay off. Across the table, Laura was no better at concealing herself. Her fingers tapped a rapid, agitated rhythm against the tablecloth, a tell she wasn't even aware of. Her enormous crocodile leather handbag sat on the empty chair beside her, its zipper deliberately left wide open. She hadn't brought it as an accessory. She had brought it as a container. In her mind, she was already leaving this room with it full. Documents, transfer letters, bearer bonds, keys, something physical and valuable that she could press against her chest in the back of the car home and know finally that it was done. At the head of the table sat Camilla, still, composed. Her diamond necklace caught the candlelight and threw tiny fragments of brilliance across the ceiling. She wore the expression of a woman who had already won. Not someone waiting for a verdict, but someone waiting for the formality of its delivery. She let her gaze sweep the room slowly, almost proprietorially, as though she were mentally redecorating it. The Parker Bowles bloodline, she had long believed, deserved to be permanently woven into the fabric of this palace. Tonight was simply the night. That belief became official. And then there was William. He sat at the center of the table, not the head, not the foot, but the center, and he did not touch his cutlery. He did not lift the glass of red wine placed precisely before him. He simply sat, with the particular stillness of a man who has already decided everything, and observed. His gaze moved across the three faces slowly, deliberately, the way a surgeon surveys a site before making the first incision. Tom's nervous fork, Laura's tapping fingers, Camilla's self-satisfied smile. He let them have their moment. He had given them enough rope. Now it was time. William pushed back his chair. The sound of the legs scraping against the marble floor cut through the room like a blade, sharp and final. Every head turned. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a ring of glossy black brass keys. They caught the light as he held them up. Heavy, substantial, unmistakably significant. These were not symbolic props. They were the master access keys to every restricted area in the palace. The cash vaults, the royal jewelry archives, the sealed historical chambers beneath the East Wing. Camilla leaned forward instinctively, her chin lifting. Her eyes burned. This was the moment she had been engineering for years. William swung his arm. The keyring flew across the table, sliding along the silk tablecloth with a whispered rush before stopping dead, right at the edge of Tom's plate. Tom's half-smirk collapsed. His face went very still. He looked up. William snapped his fingers once. The carved doors at the far end of the room exploded open simultaneously. 4 royal guards in black tactical gear stormed inside, their belts loaded, their faces blank and professional. The air in the room changed instantly, dropping several degrees in a single heartbeat. Begin. William's voice was perfectly level, not raised, not strained, completely, terrifyingly calm. 2. Officers moved directly for Tom. Before he could even open his mouth, hands like iron vices clamped around his biceps and hoisted him bodily out of his chair. He roared, actual undignified roaring, his legs kicking wildly, sending crystal glasses spinning and shattering across the table. The 3rd officer advanced on Laura. She screamed, her red-painted nails raking uselessly across the guard's bulletproof vest as he seized her elbow and dragged her back, William said, arms folded, surveying the chaos without flinching. Expel them through the main gates. If any member of this family crosses the palace stone line from this moment forward, arrest them immediately. Camilla erupted. She was on her feet before William had finished speaking, her chair toppling backward behind her with a crash that echoed off every wall. She crossed the table in 3 strides, thrusting a ring-laden finger directly into William's face, her neck flushed scarlet, the veins prominent beneath her skin. "You are insane," she spat. "By what right do you treat my flesh and blood like criminals? I will call Charles. He will destroy you for this." William took 1 step forward. Camilla took 1 step back. His eyes did not waver. He lowered his voice to a register meant only for her. He has already seen the tape. Everything. From the donation box to Freddie's knee. The color left Camilla's face in a single, instantaneous drain. Her lips parted. Nothing came out. The arrogance, that impenetrable years-cultivated armor of absolute certainty, fractured on the spot. She stood there, a woman suddenly stripped of every weapon she had spent years assembling, staring into the face of a reckoning she had never believed was coming. But to understand how this moment was constructed, how William engineered the most decisive and devastating royal purge in living memory, we have to go back. 3 weeks earlier. To the morning everything changed. The transfer of power. Balmoral Castle at dawn carries a particular quality of silence. Not empty silence, dense silence. The kind that has weight and texture, that presses against the ears and slows the breath. 3 weeks before that fateful dinner, King Charles stood alone in his reading room before a fire that had burned down to its final orange core. He was not the hollowed, bedridden figure the tabloids had been breathlessly constructing for their readers. He stood straight. His eyes were sharp. He had the contained, deliberate energy of a man who has made peace with a decision he has carried for a long time. When William walked in, Charles said nothing for a moment. Then he crossed to the portrait on the far wall, swung it aside, and opened the safe behind it. He took out the brass keyring, heavy, cold, significant, and placed it directly into his son's palm. "It is time, William," he said quietly. "This palace, these tunnels, and what is hidden beneath them. They are yours now." William felt the weight of the keys settle into his hand. He did not feel triumphant. He felt, and this is the part that matters, the smell of something wrong rising from the very corridors he was being handed responsibility for. Because while King Charles had been carefully stepping back from public duties to prepare for the transition, something had been filling the vacuum he left behind. The Parker Bowles faction had begun conducting themselves as though the palace were already theirs, moving through restricted areas freely, receiving unmarked deliveries through side gates in the depths of the night, handling assets and access with a casual entitlement that turned William's stomach. He didn't call the police. He didn't convene a family meeting. He didn't issue warnings or ultimatums. He understood something that his targets had fundamentally underestimated about him, that the most effective traps are the ones the prey never see being built. The invisible net. That night, William changed out of his customary attire. Dark turtleneck, no insignia, no royal trappings. Accompanied by a single security operative, a former intelligence professional with no official file and no traceable record, he moved through the palace's servant passageways in complete silence. Over the course of 5 hours, micro cameras no larger than a pinhead were embedded into the frames of oil paintings in the South Annex. They were concealed beneath charity donation boxes and mounted inside the ornate ironwork of chandeliers in the west corridor. Every placement was precise, deliberate, and invisible to anyone not looking for them. The hunt had begun. The prey had no idea. It took exactly 3 days for the net to catch its first haul. William sat alone in a darkened room before an encrypted laptop, and what he watched on that screen stripped away any remaining ambiguity about the nature of what he was dealing with. The footage was comprehensive. It was damning, and it was going to change everything. The first recording, time-stamped 1:45 in the morning, South Annex Corridor. Tom Parker Bowles, draped in an expensive silk robe, cracking open a wooden door with the careful, guilty movements of a man who knows what he is doing is wrong and has decided to do it anyway. 2 men stepped inside. Black suits, no palace identification, carrying the rough, unpolished energy of black market dealers. One pushed a bulging leather suitcase through the gap. Tom seized it, unlatching it with trembling hands. Inside, thick bundles of cash, completely devoid of any bank seals. Untraceable, deliberate. In exchange, Tom produced 3 golden keycards from his robe pocket. Restricted access passes, strictly reserved for authorized guests entering sealed royal areas. He was selling access to the palace, selling his family's security, selling the institution he claimed to love, for fistfuls of untraceable money that he stuffed into his pockets with the undisguised hunger of a man who has never once considered consequence. But if Tom's betrayal was brazen, Laura's was something colder, something that carried a particular flavor of cruelty. The second recording, broad daylight, palace storage room. Laura standing before 3 large wooden chests containing public charitable donations, money given by ordinary people with genuine good faith. She was berating an elderly maid in a low, vicious hiss, demanding the woman unlock the chest. When the lid came open and revealed the envelopes and loose cash inside, Laura's red-nailed hand plunged straight in, grabbing without counting, shoveling the money directly into the open maw of that designer handbag, the very same bag she would later bring to dinner, still warm with the echo of what it had already carried. When the maid flinched and opened her mouth, perhaps to object, perhaps simply to breathe, Laura moved. She grabbed the woman's uniform collar and jerked her forward until their faces were inches apart. "If you breathe a word of this," Laura hissed, "I will make sure you and your entire family never show your faces in this country again." A threat delivered to an elderly woman whose only crime was doing her job. Think about that for a moment. Is this what privilege looks like when it believes itself completely untouchable? But even this, even the financial theft, even the threats and intimidation, was not the moment that sealed their fate. That moment came on the 6th day of the investigation, and it involved a child. The garden. The enclosed garden behind the palace was golden that afternoon, bathed in the particular warmth of autumn sunlight that makes everything look kinder than it is. Little Prince George moved across the lawn, chasing tennis balls with the uncomplicated concentration of a 7-year-old who has no idea he is about to become a target. 10 meters away, Freddie, Camilla's biological grandson, was running in happy circles with a toy car, completely absorbed in his own world, when the heel of his shoe caught on an oak root jutting from the grass. He went down hard, his knee connecting with the small pebbles lining the flower bed. A bloody scrape opened across his skin. He grimaced. He sat up. He hadn't even started crying yet. George noticed. 7 years old, and his instinct was immediate and completely natural. He dropped his ball, ran over, bent his knee to the ground, and reached out his hand. "Are you okay?" The exact moment George's fingers brushed Freddie's shoulder, a shadow erupted from behind the rose bushes. Camilla moved with a speed and a force that was shocking in its deliberateness. She slapped George's hand away so hard that her nails, long, sharp, positioned with the precision of weapons, cut a vertical line across the boy's knuckles. George recoiled. His eyes went wide with the pure, uncomprehending shock of a child who has just been hurt by an adult for no reason he can understand. Camilla paid him no attention whatsoever. She scooped Freddie up, the boy still dazed, still not fully processing what had just happened around him. And her hand found his upper arm. Her fingers closed, and she pinched her own biological grandson, hard and deliberately, in the muscle of his bicep. Freddie's face crumpled. His mouth opened. "Cry," Camilla hissed, her voice low, her teeth clenched, her eyes wild with a calculation that had no room in it for the child she was holding. "What did I tell you? Say he pushed you. Cry louder." And Freddie, young, frightened, hurting now in a way that had nothing to do with any oak root, did exactly what he had been coached to do. He wailed. He pointed his finger at George's face and screamed the script he had been given. He pushed me. He shoved me on purpose. When the guards arrived at a run, summoned by the sound, Camilla had already completed her transformation. The calculating witch had vanished. In her place stood a devastated grandmother, clutching her sobbing grandchild, her own face a portrait of anguish. She accused George, 7 years old, the boy who had gone over to help, of committing deliberate violence. She pulled out her phone and began photographing the blood on Freddie's knee, loudly threatening to send the images to the tabloids, to obliterate the Wales family's reputation, to use the image of a bleeding child as a crowbar to prise William away from interfering in the Parker Bowles family's activities within the palace. She had weaponized an innocent child's fall. She had pinched her own grandson to manufacture his tears. She had coached him to lie about the boy who had come to help him. Let that land for a moment. What kind of desperation, or what kind of fundamental moral absence leads a person to that decision? Camilla never noticed the fourth guard. He stood 5 paces away, motionless, silent, in a black suit that looked identical to every other guard's black suit. On his chest, beneath the fabric, a micro camera rolled quietly. It captured everything: Freddie's natural stumble, George's instinctive kindness, Camilla's charge from the bushes, the pinch, the hissed instruction, the manufactured wail, the performance for the arriving guards, in complete, crystalline, irrefutable detail. Not a single frame was missing. Not a single sound was lost. William in the dark. Back in his private study, lit only by the cold blue glow of an encrypted screen, William watched the footage end and sat completely still. He didn't slam the desk. He didn't shout. He didn't move. The air around him was cold enough to freeze stone. He had suspected the financial crimes. He had built his trap specifically to capture them. But watching his own son, his 7-year-old son who had gone over to help a crying child, being used as a prop in someone else's scheme for palace leverage, something finalized itself in William's mind. Something that had perhaps still carried a trace of reluctance, or family sentiment, or the hope that evidence would prove him wrong, closed permanently and without sound. He removed the matte black USB drive from the laptop port. He turned it in his fingers slowly, feeling the small weight of what it contained. Footage that constituted a complete and inarguable death sentence for the parasitic arrangement that had been feeding off his family for years. He was not going to the police. Dragging this into the public legal system would only contaminate the crown, create headlines, fuel enemies, give ammunition to every institution that had spent decades waiting for an opportunity to diminish the monarchy's authority. Enemies operating from within the house were not handled with the tools of the outside world. They were handled with the most ruthless internal mechanisms the house possessed. He had work to do first. There was one more person who needed to see what was on that drive. The most important person. The one whose silent authorization would give everything that followed its absolute legitimacy. The king watches. 3 hours before the dinner, William walked the east corridor with the file folder and the USB drive, moving with the purposeful stride of a man who has already decided everything and is simply completing the final step. King Charles stood at the window of his office, hands clasped behind his back, looking out over the lawns. He was not haggard. He was not fragile. He had the steady, collected bearing of a man who has been king for long enough to know that the worst moments reveal the most truth. When William entered, he skipped every pleasantry. He walked to the desk, plugged the drive into the monitor, and pressed play. Charles stepped closer. His eyes narrowed slightly. The first video began. The South Annex, darkness, Tom in his silk robe, the leather suitcase, the stacks of unmarked cash disappearing into greedy pockets. Charles's jaw tightened. The second video, Laura's hand deep in the charity donation chest, the elderly maid's collar seized, the hissed threat delivered to a woman old enough to be a grandmother herself. Charles's breathing became audible. His chest rose and fell heavily beneath his suit jacket. Then the garden. The sunlit afternoon. Freddie's stumble. George's outstretched hand. And Camilla, the woman for whom Charles had sacrificed public approval, endured decades of criticism, traded a portion of his legacy and his honor and his family's peace. Erupting from the shadows, the pinch, the manufactured tears, the filthy accusation against his own direct bloodline, delivered with the face of a performer who has rehearsed the role. The screen faded to black, the silence in. The room became structural, something you could feel pressing against the walls. King Charles did not move. His hands gripped the edge of the oak desk, the knuckles draining to white, the blue veins standing prominent against age-spotted skin. He was not physically ill. He was being destroyed from the inside by a betrayal that had used the most defenseless possible instrument: a child's tears, a child's pointing finger, a child's obedient repetition of a lie. The love he had given this woman, the cost of it, the public outrage he had absorbed, the compromises he had made with his own conscience to justify and protect her place beside him. All of it had been quietly dismantled, turned into a mechanism of control, used to bleed and threaten the very family he had built his entire life around protecting. Tears collected in the corners of Charles's eyes. He turned away slowly, stepping back into the shadows at the edge of the room, his shoulders carrying a weight that no title or crown could reduce. He did not sign a document, he did not speak an order, he did not open his mouth. He simply let his shoulders fall and nodded once, a small, invisible movement swallowed by the darkness. But it carried the full, absolute weight of a king's authority. The highest and most ruthless privilege had been delegated. William turned and walked out of the room. It was time. The purge. And so we returned to the west dining room, to the candlelight, to the crashed chair and the scattered crystal, to Camilla standing with the blood gone from her face and William's words echoing in the space between them. He has already seen the tape. Take them away. The guards moved. Tom was hoisted from both sides, his arms wrenched behind his back before he could coordinate any meaningful resistance. The man who had stood in that South Annex corridor, stuffing unmarked cash into his robe pockets with both fists, now had the structural integrity of wet paper. His expensive leather shoes dragged across the marble floor, leaving long, pitiable scratches in the polished surface. Laura thrashed with genuine animal panic. Her arms swung wide as she fought the officer's grip, connecting with the empty chair beside her. The crocodile leather handbag launched into the air, hit the Turkish rug hard, and the zipper split completely open. The contents scattered. Bundles of high-denomination cash, the very money scooped from the charity donation chest the previous day, still carrying the fingerprints of that red-nailed hand, rolled and fanned across the rug, spreading beneath the blinding candlelight of the banquet table for every eye in the room to see. The evidence of her greed, physical and irrefutable, lay scattered beneath the boots of the royal guards as Laura sobbed and lunged toward it in a final, desperate, utterly futile attempt to gather it back. The guard's arm locked around her and she was pulled away through the main doors, leaving the money behind. And Camilla. She didn't fight. She had nothing left to fight with. Her knees gave. She went down onto the carpet, her ring-laden hands clawing at the fibers, trying to hold on to something solid in a room where every solid thing she had built her confidence upon had just dissolved completely. She knew that Charles had seen the tape. She knew what was on it. She knew there was no version of this conversation left to win. An officer stood before her, his silhouette blocking the light. He offered no physical handling. He didn't need to. His presence was the sentence made flesh. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "The car is waiting at the side entrance." It was phrased as an invitation. It was an irresistible mandate for permanent exile. She was escorted through the palace corridors, those long, carpeted, portrait-lined corridors she had walked for years with the confidence of a woman who believed she owned them. On both sides of the hall, the servants and staff stood in silence. The elderly maids, the junior footmen, the nannies. Every person who had been threatened, belittled, intimidated, or manipulated into silence over years of the Parker Bowles faction's unchecked behavior. They didn't cheer. They didn't speak. They simply stood with their chins raised and their eyes level, and in that silence was every verdict that mattered. In the courtyard, 3 armored SUVs sat running with their lights off, stripped of royal insignia. Tom and Laura were pushed into the back seats. Camilla followed, her body bent with a diminishment that had no physical cause. She was smaller now, in some fundamental way, than she had been 2 hours ago. The armored doors slammed shut, and then the convoy rolled forward, through the main gates, and into the dark. William stood at the top of the palace steps. The cold night wind moved through his coat. He watched the convoy's taillights disappear into the darkness beyond the gates, and then he stood, in the silence that followed. The palace was clean. The parasite had been removed, comprehensively, without public spectacle, without legal theater, without the kind of messy, drawn-out process that would have given them time to maneuver and perform. It had been surgical. It had been decisive. It had been, in the truest sense, a royal reckoning. When William turned and walked back inside, pulling the massive oak doors shut behind him, he found Kate waiting at the end of the corridor. She wore a dark dress. Her eyes were calm and direct. She didn't ask for the outcome. She could read it in the profound exhaustion settled into his face, the kind that comes not from physical effort, but from the emotional cost of burying something deeply personal with your own hands. She stepped forward and laced her fingers into his. They had protected their son. They had protected the crown. They had excised something that had been quietly poisoning the institution from within for years, and they had done it without making George a headline or Charles a tabloid story, or the monarchy a source of public embarrassment. But victory at this level is never clean, and William knew it. The cracks in the foundation of trust between people who share a roof and a name do not seal themselves just because the source of the damage has been removed. And somewhere out there, in some quiet country estate stripped of every privilege and credential and key, Camilla was sitting in the dark. She had lost her access. She had lost her children's position. She had lost the protection of a husband who had watched tape of her pinching her own grandson and turned his face away in the shadow so no one would see him weep. But hatred doesn't require resources to survive. Resentment doesn't need a palace address. And a woman as calculating as Camilla Parker Bowles, cornered, humiliated, and stripped of everything she believed was owed to her. Is she truly finished? Or is tonight's devastation simply the origin point of something more patient, more vicious, and more carefully constructed than anything that came before? The battle for the palace has been won, but the war, the one that is waged in silence, in bitterness, in the long and careful nursing of revenge, may only just be beginning. What do you believe? Does a woman like Camilla Parker Bowles accept exile and disappear quietly into the night? Or does the humiliation of this evening become the sharpest possible motivation for a counterattack the palace never sees coming? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this breakdown compelling, like this video, share it with someone who follows the royals, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. The crown has been secured, but the story is far from over.